Nice jacket, Daniel.
Thank you very much. I think one has. I have a feeling we're going to be the last people in the world still wearing ties. I've noticed that almost everyone has dropped them post-lockdown. But I also notice if you look at those big sort of dioramas on the walls of the Lords of the great parliamentary occasions, and then you Google what men were wearing in 1886 or whatever, the Lords is always about 15 years behind to get out of knee breeches, top hats, stocks, whatever. So I think it will stick out the way those kind of black jackets and sponge bag trousers did for MPs in the 50s. Will be the last people still wearing ties.
I think, Daniel, Lord Scriven has taken your example.
I was going to say, Daniel, I heard some people saying, and I hope so.
Except, honestly, I all my life I've been trying to work out what the function of the tie is.
Yes.
It's the only item of male clothing that has absolutely no purpose whatever.
I'm not sure that Donald Trump thought that.
No.
If I may say so.
Decoration, Dan, I think.
Yeah, I think it does have a purpose, because otherwise your shirts and jackets are very dull.
Yes.
A bit like my black dress, I grant you, but...
Thanks for that gender-neutral comment, Nuala. Genevieve, do we mute ourselves or do you mute all of us?
If you could mute yourselves, that would be great, and then go back on to, obviously, unmute when you're speaking. We're just waiting for Lord Frost. Hopefully he will come back on momentarily.
Aha. Are you there?
We're here.
You're here?
Yeah, yes.
Good. Excellent.
And wearing a tie, as you'll notice, in honour of the sort of authority of the Lords. I thought it was the right thing to do for this.
I think, if I may say so, I think that was absolutely the right decision. So, right, very good to see you. And I think if that's okay with you, we can begin. I'll start by saying my magic words, and then we're off. If you're happy with that, okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. Well, I have to do a countdown. 5, 4. Good afternoon and welcome to this session of the European Affairs Subcommittee on the Protocol on Ireland and Northern Ireland. And today we're concluding our programme of oral evidence for our introductory inquiry examining the current situation in Northern Ireland as it relates to the protocol. And we're continuing our work today through an evidence session with Lord Frost, Minister of State at the Cabinet Office with ministerial responsibility for the protocol, joined by 2 Cabinet Office officials, Rebecca Ellis and Mark Davis. You are all very welcome, and Lord Frost, we're particularly grateful to you for agreeing to come and give evidence to us. Thank you very much for that. And we much look forward to your evidence. Today's meeting is being broadcast, and a verbatim transcript will be taken for subsequent publication, which will be sent to witnesses to check for accuracy. I should also refer to the list of members' interests as published on the committee's website. So with that introduction, perhaps I could ask Lord Hayne to ask the first question.
Thank you, Lord Chair. And Lord Frost, can I add my thanks to giving this evidence? It's good to see you. Would you agree that building trust between opposing sides is an essential prerequisite for a successful negotiator?
Thank you, Lord Hayne. Can I, just before answering that, just very briefly, just to say I'm very happy to be here and thank you for inviting me. As I said in my letter of the 2nd of June, I don't think it's right for me to make an absolutely firm commitment about how often I appear, but given all the calls on my time. This is actually my 6th select committee hearing in under 2 months, and I've still got one to go before recess. So I hope you agree I'm sort of fulfilling my scrutiny responsibilities, but delighted to be here and looking forward to answering the questions. On trust, I think you do need, obviously, a degree of trust between negotiators to make things happen. But I would sort of set that in a bit of context in this particular negotiation. First of all, I make no apology for telling things like it is. I think it's clear that it's important to be clear about what you think so that the other side can understand that. And sometimes that's welcome and sometimes it isn't, but it's been a feature of our approach that we try to be clear. I think the trust issue, you know, if I'm honest about this, I think it goes a long way back, and it is something where, you know, all sides bear a degree of responsibility. You know, in this particular negotiation, I think, you know, we had a sense, I suppose, that the Northern Ireland issue was part of a bigger kind of play in the negotiations of 2018 to 19. Last year, as we said extensively at the time, we did have threats made against us during the negotiations, and we had the UK Internal Market Bill as a reaction to that. That's now been diffused, but it's clearly part of the issue. We had the Article 16, the vaccines hard border attempt at the end of January without any warning. We have the fact that the EU have, having reached an agreement with us on Article 10 on state aid in December, put out a document in January without telling us that went in a different direction. They passed legislation in December last year on TRQs, which we had no warning of, which has caused us the problems we're now trying to deal with. So I think if we're talking about sort of unilateralism and you know, how the negotiations are happening, then I think there are things that have happened on all sides that, you know, have caused the problem that exists. What we need to do is not dwell on that, but move on from it. That's why we talked about the new balance that we need to try and find, and, you know, we would prefer a consensual way forward to get there if we could, but I think we need to move on. We need to have a constructive you know, discussion about the way this protocol is working, and put the history behind us if we can.
Well, I have negotiated in the United Nations on behalf of the government, the EU, and in Northern Ireland, and I think trust is essential to get any sort of deal. It strikes me that you've done really well in losing the trust of the Northern Ireland Unionists, Loyalists, Nationalists, interlocutors in the EU and Dublin. That's pretty successful negotiation, isn't it?
So I wouldn't agree with the way you characterise the situation, and obviously I point to the fact that we successfully conducted the biggest free trade, the biggest bilateral agreement ever. Negotiations about that last year, and successfully concluded that, and I think that points to the fact that, you know, quite a lot of trust exists between the two sides. I think it's important not to dwell on it. I wouldn't really agree with the way you put the situation. You know, we have productive discussions. The difficulty is that there are different views of the fundamentals, and obviously that produced the sense that we are talking past each other at time. But I think that is a different kind of problem.
But I think the loss of trust with Dublin is something that pains me particularly, and I would urge you to go the extra mile to try and rebuild that, because of the tangled history between the Republic of Ireland and the United Kingdom. It's really important to rebuild that trust, if I may say so.
I agree with you. I don't think it's in quite such a parlous state as you suggest, if I may be honest about that.
It's my impression, if I may say so, that it is.
Well, we have different perceptions of this issue. You know, once again, I think, you know, things are said by all sides that don't necessarily land well, and that goes for certain people in the Irish government as perhaps it has done for people on the UK side. And I think it is, it's important we're all try and act in a way that is conducive to a good negotiation.
I think megaphone diplomacy doesn't work, but perhaps I can leave it at that, Lord Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Lord Hayne. Lord Dodds.
Thank you, Lord Chair, and thank you, Lord Frost, for coming here today and answering our questions. Could I ask you just to outline where we are at the moment in terms of outstanding issues that still need to be addressed? There was some talk, I think, recently about 12 areas where there'd been no satisfactory response from the European Union. So if you could maybe outline where things stand as of today.
I will, and I may turn to colleagues if that's useful, with your permission, Chair, if you want to get into the detail of this. I mean, the precise number of issues that are outstanding, I think we'll kind of group it in a different way, but I think it's fair to say there are probably 20 or maybe more different sort of strands to the outstanding problems. Some of them are quite fundamental, like how the goods at risks arrangements work, how we manage SPS goods movements, and so on. Medicines is another very important one. Others are important but sort of segmented issues that have been thrown up by the way the protocol is being implemented. For example, pets movement, livestock movements, particular issues that have probably a particular solution if we find it. So there's quite a long list of those, and I think it's fair to say we haven't made the progress we'd really like to in moving any of those forward.
Thank you. And clearly time is short, and some of these issues will come to a head again once grace periods run out. So and even if they are addressed, we're still left with the problem of the democratic deficit and the direct application of laws. So I'd be interested to hear how you think that issue can be addressed, how we restore democratic accountability and oversight of laws made for Northern Ireland. You talked recently about restoring a new balance in the way the protocol is operated, and clearly for many people in Northern Ireland, it's felt that the balance of the Belfast Agreement and subsequent agreements has been altered as a result of the protocol. So maybe you could care to comment on those points.
Yeah, I think, I mean, there's obviously a lot in there, and we could talk for some time about the issues. The democratic deficit issue obviously is a significant one. It's because this is quite an unusual arrangement in democratic terms that we had to include the consent mechanism in the protocol back in 2019 as at least a kind of a moment when the sort of unusual nature of having a lot of legislation imposed directly could be dealt with. It isn't entirely satisfactory. I don't think anybody thinks that it is. And one of the issues of the flow of legislation is is proving problematic. If you agree, Lord Chair, I might turn to Rebecca on this, who looks at this particular point day to day, and it's thrown up a few problems for the last few days.
Please.
Thank you. I mean, as your lordships will be aware, there is a group called the Joint Consultative Working Group, which is designed to be a forum where measures that are coming down the line from the EU are sort of notified. The Northern Ireland Executive is represented there, and we have been putting a lot of effort in recent months to get that forum operating in a way that gives notification in advance, that enables the potential implications of draft measures to be properly understood. I think we're making some progress in that I think the working methods have improved. It's meeting on a regular basis, and we welcome that the Commission's sort of joined with us in trying to get that happening, but I think it's still not, it's not yet there. I think we had what we might call a drop of new measures last Thursday, which included, I think, a list of over 800 measures, I think 666 of which had already been adopted. And in many respects, there was no more information provided than what you could read in the official journal. So I think we are very much aware of this issue. It's an important issue, and we will continue to work through that group to try and get the process working more effectively. It's important that within the EU, the implications of this for Northern Ireland is fully understood, and that kind of mechanism has to work better in order to, as you say, I think, ensure that there is a proper understanding and a role for the Northern Ireland executive in that process.
Thank you very much, Lord Chair.
Thank you very much. Baroness Gowdy. Baroness Gowdy.
Yeah.
Pardon, I hadn't unmuted. I'm so sorry. I was so interested in. Good afternoon, Lord Frost, Rebecca. What does the package of measures announced by the EU on the 30th of June, including the extension and the grace period on chilled meats, the supply of medicines, the movement of guide dogs, and the re-tagging of animals, demonstrate flexibility and good faith on its part? Further, what steps will the UK take to demonstrate its own flexibility and good faith? And to what degree does the EU legislative change to address the medicines issue, which is a really important issue to everyone? And there's been much publicity on that issue above all.
That's right. I think the announcement on the 30th of June of the extension of the grace period and these other measures, is helpful, and we've said that. And I think the extension of the chilled meats grace period kind of provides a bit of a breathing space for things to happen. But obviously, it is only temporary, and we will face the problem again at the end of September. And obviously, there are some other grace periods in the mix as well during the year. As regards to the other issues, medicines, guide dogs, retagging of animals, one or two other issues, the problem is that unless something's come in the last day or so, with the exception of medicines, we haven't had anything in writing yet to tell us what the proposed solutions are. So we're very happy to work on them when we know what they are. And on medicines, obviously the potential solution was trailed in the press kind of a month before we received it. We did receive it a week or so ago, maybe a little bit longer. And it is quite complicated, and we're working through it. I think it's a sort of valiant effort, I suppose, to deal with the problems. We're not convinced that it does deal with absolutely all of the difficulties. So we need to talk to you about that, and I think we are. I mean, we already have, and I think we are again shortly. So that's the difficulty. It's not that we want to be kind of ungracious about this. I mean, these are not. There are very different levels of centrality to the problems presented by the protocol, but it's good they have been highlighted. But the problem is, we're simply not having the quality of discussion about them that we need to resolve the problems. And meanwhile, the time is passing.
Can there be a guarantee, particularly on medicines, that the scare stories that they could run out of certain medicines for serious illnesses? Every illness is serious, but for more serious illnesses, is there a guarantee that we can get a further grace period before this grace period runs out?
So the problem on medicines is that obviously, I mean, we talk to the industry about this all the time, and the problem is that because of the nature of the product, the lead times for supply markets are quite long. And although this grace period expires at the end of the year, actually, firms are beginning to take decisions already about what they can supply. We are hearing, as the PM and others have said, that some drugs are being withdrawn, and if we can't find a way through this, I would guess that might increase. We are absolutely clear people in Northern Ireland got to have the same access to medicines as every other part of the United Kingdom. So, if we can find a way quickly on the Commission's proposal or something like it, that'll obviously be helpful. But if we can't, then there is an obvious difficulty coming down the line.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Baroness Ritchie.
Thank you, Lord Chair. It's good to meet Lord Frost and to your officials as well. I want to move on to the whole area of the SPS veterinary agreement, and various references have been made to that, both in committees, giving evidence, and also wider at conferences and in media interviews. And there are various types of SPS veterinary agreements. You have the Swiss style, the New Zealand, and also the Australian one. So what progress has been made in relation to the SPS veterinary agreement, and how can compromise be reached between the respective UK and EU positions in favour of equivalence and alignment?
Yeah, it's a very important area. Thanks, Baroness Ritchie. And one which causes, I suppose, a degree of frustration in the way it's handled. I think if you go back to first principles on this, obviously there are kind of three possible situations between two territories. One is in which one operates the rules of the other as regards SPS. That is the proposal the EU have made to us at the moment. The other, at the other end of the spectrum, is that two territories operate two sets of very different rules and have to deal with the reality of what that means for trade between them. And then there is a third situation where two territories operate rules which are essentially providing for the same standards, but have some differences in detail. And that is the third situation, is the one we are in. Actually, the differences of detail are very small at the moment, though the EU is bringing in more legislation that will expand that gap over time. And it's in that space that you can have an equivalence arrangement where you recognise legislation as equivalent, and sort of formally different, but providing for the same standards. We have proposed such an agreement covering SPS goods, and we've discussed it a bit, but I don't think we've really had the quality of discussion we would really like. So you're right to point to other models. The New Zealand model is one, the one that's incorporated in the Canada agreement is another. These are equivalence mechanisms leading to equivalence arrangements. So there are precedents. The Swiss one, which is the one that the EU tend to talk about, is I would say, although it's quite an old agreement and different in some areas of detail, it's more like the first arrangement, where you essentially have to operate the rules of the other entity, and that is the problem with that. So that's the situation. We think we have proposed a solution. We're just once again not really able to have a good discussion about it.
And you say, Lord Frost, through Lord Chair, that you haven't been able to have a good discussion with about that. When did you last meet Vice President Šefčovič and his officials to discuss this particular issue, or when, alternatively, do you intend to meet him to discuss these issues further? Because at the end of the day, the agri-food industry in Northern Ireland is looking for a solution, and the farming industry is central to our local economy.
Well, I absolutely agree with that, and you know, the food and the farming industry in Northern Ireland is extremely important, and I think, you know, the industry, both primary producers and every other bit of the supply chain, has done an amazing job in keeping things going, frankly, in over the last few months, given all the difficulties. I mean, I talk to Marosh, you know, pretty often. And, you know, this issue comes up between us. There are technical discussions kind of all the time on all these issues. I don't know when we last discussed equivalence, but it wasn't that long ago. And the difficulty is the EU at the moment doesn't want to work on the kind of agreement that we are proposing. And, you know, quite recently, certainly last week, Maroš Šefčovič, you know, repeated that the best way forward was the Swiss-style alignment agreement, and that's the problem. It's two different views.
And finally, Lord Chair, would this be one area where the UK government would have plans as part of the plans that you intend to publish within the next 5 to 10 days?
So obviously we have to wait and see what we say when we announce plans to Parliament before recess. I don't think I'm sort of breaking any secrets to say that obviously we'll set out an approach on SPS goods as on any others to try and find a constructive way forward.
Thank you, Lord Frost. Thank you, Lord Chair.
Thank you very much. This is such an important area, Lord Frost. I just wondered whether you would you say you're looking for a compromise?
Yes, I mean we've sent in, you know, quite a detailed proposal, and I think, you know, I think it's fair to say our proposal would break new ground in the sense that it would be broader than existing equivalence arrangements. That's true, and the EU are right to point that out. But it's kind of inevitable given the situation that it will be broader. You know, I think we would love to get into a discussion on this that you know, try to kind of find a pragmatic set of solutions to these problems, and you know, we're absolutely willing to talk around it. The only thing we can't do is, you know, accept an ex ante commitment to apply the rules of the other party for reasons I've gone into frequently, and you know, probably clear. But if that's off the table, then obviously we can have a discussion.
Thank you, Baroness Alone.
Thank you, Lord Chairman. Lord Frost, you're welcome to the committee. The evidence which you've given us so far has been, to me, somewhat challenging as someone who lives in Northern Ireland, because I don't see much ground for hope. My question to you is that during the inquiry, we have heard that businesses based in Great Britain were not adequately prepared for the new arrangements for trade with Northern Ireland under the protocol. And indeed, many of us who live in Northern Ireland have had and continue to have experience of the problems which are manifest every day in Northern Ireland. So why was that? Why was there no preparation? And what steps is the government taking now to ensure that GB businesses continue to supply the Northern Ireland market or are able to resume their supplies to the Northern Ireland market again, particularly in the uncertainty which you have been describing thus far today?
Mm. So it's a very fair question. I think, you know, there are a number of answers to it, I guess. One is obviously that we didn't reach agreement on the arrangements for some aspects of GB Northern Ireland trade until quite late into December. That was Michael Gove's sort of bit of this negotiation, and obviously we didn't know that we were going to have a zero tariff deal until Christmas Eve. So necessarily some of this came in quite late, which is a sort of practical problem. You know, nevertheless, we have done a lot. You know, we put in place the Trader Support Service, the Movement Assistance Scheme, the Digital Assistance Scheme is coming. You know, we've done our very best to kind of communicate, and I think standing those up from nothing effectively has been quite an achievement. You know, we've done a lot by way of industry forums, encouraging visits to the website, webinars, calls to business, and quite a lot of engagement with specific logistics operators and the people who make this work day to day. We write constantly to businesses about it. So we've been doing what we can, and we have done quite a lot, but obviously you can't be quite sure who you're not reaching. And I think one of the things we have learned, which might have been foreseeable, might have been kind of predictable, but I think has been more of a difficulty than we thought, is this sort of chilling effect of companies in Great Britain who decide that it's all too much trouble, reasonably enough. Can't be bothered to engage with the process. They're often SMEs or micro businesses. Dealing with this is a significant call on their time, and they just decide it's not worth it. And that's why you're seeing some of the trade diversion and supply chain issues to Northern Ireland that we're seeing. So I think that probably has been more marked than we thought, and obviously it's at the root of some of the current difficulties that we've got.
Can I just ask a supplementary, Lord Chair? Can I ask, in the context of the services which you described, such as the trader support service and the digital support service, have you done any analysis or any, if you like, quality assurance of whether those services are actually meeting the needs of the businesses who would wish to do business with Northern Ireland?
So there is a process, and I think one of the things we're seeing is that companies are definitely finding it kind of easier to interact, in the sense that at least at first go, trader support service, the number of non-compliant declarations, not engagement with the process properly, has fallen dramatically, to really quite low levels from, relatively high levels at the start. So I think, the real world effect shows that, companies are getting to grips with it. Of course, what that doesn't do is, pick up companies who just decide they don't wish to engage with it, and they won't show up in the statistics. We have spent a lot of money on this, and I think it would be surprising if we weren't getting some results for it. We've spent 125 million on the TSS already. We're probably going to spend 350 million or so over the next 2 years if it remains operating on this basis. We've already spent 25 million on the digital assistance scheme, and we're probably going to spend 150 million on that before it's all over. So these are quite substantial sums of money for a lot of companies, and it's one reason why we find it a little bit frustrating when we're told that we're not implementing the protocol. Very large sums are being spent on this. We can't reach everybody and can't do everything, but a lot is happening.
Can I ask just one very quick supplementary, Lord Chairman, because it's so important? And that is, you describe huge sums of money, but clearly that is not touching down in Northern Ireland in any way. Is the bulk of that money being spent on the procurement of IT systems and consultants' reports on how to make things better?
So a lot of it will be spent on staff to make these schemes work. A lot of it is being spent on procurement of IT systems, you're right, and simply running the processes. So that is the cost of the protocol.
Thank you, Lord Chairman.
Thank you very much. Lord Hannon.
Thank you very much, my Lord Chairman. I'd like, with permission, to go back, Lord Frost, to something you said right at the beginning in response to Lord Hayne about trust and cooperation. Did I understand correctly? It was Rebecca's answer to Lord Dodds that just to make sure I understood, that the EU had dumped 800 new measures without forewarning. Is that right? If that is the case, is this a sustainable way of carrying on if that's the level of consultation?
Well, that is correct. Basically, that's the problem. Obviously, the Joint Consultative Working Group is supposed to give us advance warning. If all it's doing is, giving us what's in the official journal in some other form, then it's not really. There's not a lot of point in it. It needs to give sort of upstream warning, and I think the way it's working at the moment, is a bit indicative of how would I put it? Not taking not taking entirely seriously the fact that the EU is legislating for another territory. These are laws that are imposed on another territory, without a process. And I think the least that can be done is to give some advance warning of that, some understanding, some chance to sort of feedback and consult. And that's not really happening at the moment. But Rebecca, do you want to add to that?
Yes, the number I gave was the total number of measures that were notified to us, which it happens on a cycle. So the notification that happened last week was for measures adopted over a 3-month period. Some of those were prospective measures where we were sort of given the name of the measure that was going through the system. I think it was over 600 that had already been adopted, but that covered a 3-month period.
Thank you. I mean, that would seem to me prima facie to indicate striking lack of goodwill and good faith. But I wonder whether I could ask a different question. Let's call it the Thomas of Gresford question, because it's come up with several other witnesses. It is often said that the protocol gives Northern Ireland the best of both worlds, gives it access to both markets. Sitting where you sit, what do you see as the advantages of the status quo?
It's a very good question. I think, what would I say? I mean, I think one obvious advantage of the protocol, though it was never disputed at any point in the negotiation, is the fact that there is no infrastructure at the border between Northern Ireland and Ireland. That was always a desired aim by all parties, and it's delivered it, and it's essential. And even though sometimes it's sort of taken for granted as reality of life, I think it's important to note the protocol does deliver that, and it's really essential that it does do it. I think the best of both worlds argument, it sort of depends, but I don't entirely buy it. I think, obviously, if you are a company that primarily trades with the EU rather than within the UK, then you might well think the protocol is a good arrangement and gives you benefits. But if you look at Northern Ireland as a whole, obviously, 5 times trade between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK is 5 times as big as trade between Northern Ireland and Ireland. And Northern Ireland's exports, in inverted commas, are 50% to Great Britain and only 20% to Ireland. So taking the average, the overall, it doesn't make sense for Northern Ireland to gain the, in quotation marks, benefit of access to the EU market while having quite restricted access to the rest of its own market. And that is the fundamental problem. It's obviously fair to say that there is a range of view, particularly amongst business, on the protocol. But I personally, I don't think I've spoken to a single business that has not raised the issue of Great Britain to Northern Ireland's goods movements as in some way a problem for them. Some it's less marked than others. Some it's a very serious problem, but it always seems to be there, and that is, I think, where the trade-off doesn't quite work. Final point on this, obviously it is coming with that balance of benefits and costs. So if you look at it, is coming with a degree of societal disruption and a kind of weakening of identity in one community. And I don't think that sort of trade-off really kind of stacks up, even if you can point to, individuals and companies and some within it for whom it's an advantage. Overall, I think is problematic.
Thank you very much.
Just following on from that question, do you think there's more that the government can do to explain that there are, for some companies at least, potential benefits?
So I think I think those who benefit are sort of quite well aware of that. Is the truth in Northern Ireland, and I don't think it. I don't think it totally makes sense to encourage a situation which generates more of something which is a problem. there will always be some adjustment of supply chains and trade patterns. That's obvious. It happens after Brexit for wider reasons. But I think it's very clear that there is, over and above that, some trade diversion going on. It's clear that trade within the island of Ireland in both directions is going up. And I given that is in many ways a problem, rather than an advantage, I don't think it totally makes sense for us to sort of encourage more of that development rather than deal with the consequences of it. I think that's how I would put it. Why
is it a problem?
Because it's, it is one of the, one of the reasons it's happening is that, there are many reasons, but one of them is that firms in Northern Ireland are not necessarily able to choose their preferred suppliers in Great Britain, but having to find substitutes elsewhere. And it might not be their first choice, but for wider reasons, because of the way the protocol works, it might be easier for them. So, to present that as a sort of advantage or a benefit seems sort of not quite, that's not quite an accurate description of the situation, I would say.
Thank you very much. Lord Thomas.
You're still on mute, I think, Lord Thomas, to us anyway.
You made a rather serious charge that the EU are not taking seriously that it is legislating for another territory. Is that really your view? Rebecca Ellis referred to the meetings of the Joint Consultative Committee, which require a proper understanding and a role for Northern Ireland. And as Lord Hannan referred to, she pointed to the overwhelming number of measures and there hasn't been notice and so on. What are you going to do about it?
Well, I think what we need to do about it is find what we constantly talk about as the new balance that needs to be created in operating the protocol. The protocol exists because there's a delicate balance in the Good Friday Agreement and because there are a lot of different interests and concerns that have to be satisfied through the protocol. And I think that means that all sides have to act with a degree of sort of respect and sensitivity.
Sorry to interrupt, but can you define the new balance that you are seeking if the protocol balance set out in the protocol is not satisfactory? What is the new balance?
So obviously we'll say more on this next week when we set out our approach more broadly. But I think the fundamental thing that has to be rebalanced is goods have to be able to flow as freely as possible between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. The reality of the UK customs territory as set out in the protocol, the reality of the UK internal market as set out in the protocol has got to mean something and be real to the people who operate within it. And at the moment,
are you really arguing for scrapping the balance in the current protocol and setting out anew to find a new agreement?
So I think what we're arguing is that we need to find a different way of managing the situation, and I think the protocol as is not providing that.
It's not fit for purpose, is what you're saying, isn't it?
So it is not being operated in a way which respects the balance in the Belfast Good Friday Agreement.
But is it fit for purpose? Is it fit for purpose?
So I'm not sure I'll characterize it that way. I think as being, I don't think I would make a judgment on that point, but I think...
Why wouldn't you make a judgment on that point? You're in charge of policy in this area.
Because we need to find out, and that is what we've been trying to do over the last few months, whether it is possible to operate these arrangements in a way which gives a different balance, and that is really what the kind of discussion we've not had with the EU but would like to.
but you'd have to have their agreement to a different balance, wouldn't you? You can't just impose it.
We can't just impose it, at least in those terms. And the most durable agreements are those where both sides agree to them. And we've said, we've made no secret of the fact that we would prefer to proceed by consensus on this. We both have an interest, both sides have an interest in supporting the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, the delicate balance, the need not to disrupt everyday lives in Northern Ireland. We are both committed to that, EU as well as UK. And if the protocol as it operating is not delivering that, then both sides have, I think, an obligation to try and deal with the situation. And that's what the discussion we would like to be having.
And what mechanism would you use for that? What forum is there in which you would come to a new agreement, a new balance?
So, I mean, if it depends what is, what ground we're trying to cover. There is negotiations going on all the time between my teams and their opposite numbers, and there is, whatever the kind of institutional framework for it, there's plenty of room to have a genuine negotiation between us and the EU about changes if necessary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Lord MP.
Good afternoon, Minister. What is your response to those arguing in favour of alternatives to the protocol?
So I think what I would say is that it kind of depends what they mean. I think there will always need to be some kind of tailored treaty relationship between us and the EU that covers Northern Ireland. What happens in Northern Ireland will always be in this area, to some extent exceptional, and we'll always need a treaty relationship to cover that. So in that sense, I don't think those who simply say the protocol should disappear and that would solve the problem, I don't think that's a kind of realistic assessment of the situation. So the question is, what do we need to do? I think we need to have the quality of the discussion with the EU that explores whether the current very serious difficulties can be resolved within the framework of the protocol, or whether we need a kind of more fundamental discussion of some aspects of the way it works, and that kind of remains to be tested at the moment.
In your Irish Times piece, you wrote that if it is not possible to identify solutions, we will of course have to consider all our options. And we recall, I think, was it the late Baroness Thatcher used the term, there is no alternative. And I see our EU colleagues are using that term as well, but you and I both know there are always alternatives. So what would your options be?
There are alternatives, and I think in passing, I think the EU should be careful when they say there are no alternatives to the protocol, because that implies that the consent vote, which is there in the protocol, is a meaningless vote. But because if there's no alternative to the protocol, then what is that vote about? Self-evidently, there are alternatives to it.
I mean, obviously, both sides are obliged, I think, in Article 18 to look, if the Assembly were to vote against Articles 5 to 10, you have to negotiate an alternative.
Precisely.
But in terms of consent, I just wanted to close with asking you, what measure did you use back in 2019 to assess what consent was available for the protocol when it was agreed?
Yeah, so it obviously was a very delicate bit of the negotiation and only unlocked quite late. Our original proposal that we put out in writing, I think at the beginning of October, suggested there should be a consent vote at the start of the process, that it wasn't reasonable for Northern Ireland to have to go into this arrangement without some sort of act of democratic legitimisation of it in the circumstances. But unfortunately, we couldn't get that agreed, which is why we have the post facto arrangements instead, and the particular form that the consent vote takes. So it was a product of the the complicated negotiating situation in those last days in October.
Well, we no doubt will return to our views on that issue at another time. Thank you, Lord Chair.
Thank you, Lord MP. Could I, before passing the floor to Lord Kane, could I just ask one other question? I mean, Lord MP referred to your article in the Irish Times. I think you also wrote in that article that arrangements can work only if there is genuine cross-community consent. And I just wondered how you thought that could be achieved, given the strongly divergent views between the communities of Northern Ireland, and how you're working with the with the European Union in order to build up a sense of community, which is at the moment not there.
Yeah, I think I think there are different meanings to the word consent. I guess. I mean, there's obviously the kind of formal meaning of the vote in 4 years' time in the protocol. I think when there was the Irish Times article, I think what we were trying to say was that in the real world, it's very difficult to operate anything much if it doesn't enjoy kind of broad support from the governed, because it's just in practice difficult to make things work in those circumstances. And obviously we do have a 50-50 split of opinion on the protocol